Well, thank you, everyone.
Okay. If you want, I can introduce you a little, your profile. Okay, good afternoon to everyone, and welcome to this new session of the Inclusive Living Lab with a presentation of Edward Bace from Middlesex University. Edward is a senior lecturer in banking and researcher in the Middlesex University from 2013 to present. And he has an MBA from the New York University and a PhD from University of Michigan. He has extensive experience in research and training, and also client experience over the last 30 years in global business and finance. And he knows a little Spanish, I think, but his presentation will be obviously in English. The topic of his presentation is income inequality related with to financial development. And thank you, Edward. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Pedro, and thanks to all for joining. Before I begin, I'd just like to thank everyone for the opportunity to join the Inkazi community. It's been very beneficial from my perspective. I've learned a lot, and hopefully we can continue to build upon that. So thank you all. So this presentation, this topic may be a little bit off the track from what we're accustomed to seeing among these seminars, but being having a financial background, this I thought might be an interesting perspective to consider. Obviously, it has social implications as well. So if we may, let's just dive in then. So we all recognize, obviously, the critical nature of income inequality. And unfortunately, on average, it's been observed to be growing in many regions, particularly among the advanced economies. This has increased even with the relatively quick pace of financial evolution that we've seen, especially recently, which reinforces to me the suggestion of a meaningful relationship between financial evolution, a broad term, which I'll narrow down shortly, and income distribution. We all recognize too that reduced income inequality contributes positively to a wide variety of social issues. We've observed that more unequal distribution has negative effects on mental and physical well-being, educational attainment, and social security issues. Take the US as an example, my homeland, where I haven't been for decades for various reasons, but we there observe that levels of mental illness, teen birth rates, prison population are substantially higher than in nations with lower income inequality, models being nations like Finland, Norway, Sweden, and Japan. The main causes of income inequality, sorry, I skipped ahead a little bit here. Oh, it's better. Okay, so here's evidence of that. This is taken from the source WID, I think, the top 10% national income share of various countries. And here you can see recently upticks in income inequality in the top 10% national income in the US, China, the UK, Germany, and various others. Coming from lower levels earlier, which is a bit concerning and merits exploration. So this has prompted various research questions and an approach. The basic question being, does financial evolution affect income inequality and how? Or more specifically, what I focused on here is aspects of financial development, which I can define even more narrowly shortly. But ideally, we can expand these studies to extend to financial globalization and financial liberalization. These three, if you will, being drivers of overall financial evolution. So my research was based on 80 countries around the world over a 4 to 5 year period. I looked at variables including bank credit to the private sector as a percentage of GDP, which is a relatively accessible metric. Doesn't cover many countries, so there are some data limitations here. But previous studies have used this metric in terms of what they call financial development. How developed is the financial system, if you will. And on top of that, I looked at the influence of the banking system, strength and supervision characteristics on income inequality, overlaying that on the financial development, bank credit to the private sector. Doing a simple ordinary least squares analysis where my dependent variable was the income Gini coefficient. Authors like Jenkins and others have used this in the past widely in such studies. And I already referred to some data limitations, not only around bank credit to the private sector, but banking system assessments provided by various sources. The one I finally chose seemed to have the widest coverage. But if anyone is aware of better sources, please let me know. So moving on. So from the literature, we get some indications from which we can form hypotheses that financial evolution on balance does reduce income inequality. And there are some relatively recent studies. Maklouf et al., for instance, looked at bank activity versus financial markets in providing financial services, and found that this was robustly associated with less inequality in the developing world, however, more in the developed world. So many of these studies we find come up with a mixed picture. Financial development, as we define it, providing wider access to credit, provided this is used for efficient investment in human capital, has a tendency to reduce inequality. So this author Ozkan, for instance, while this did not apply in every country she looked at, by and large, it seemed to hold true with some exceptions. Financial liberalization as well was seen to largely reduce income inequality, given that this gave better access to funding, contributing to educational attainment if this funding is used properly. And Paukeri and others, focusing on Finland, pointed out various reasons for what he saw as a more recent deterioration in that inequality, such as collective wage setting systems and tax legislation. And financial globalization as the third prong, contributing to greater accessibility. And we find authors such as Qureshi verifying this, looking at factors such as technology, capital, concentrated markets, emerging markets being given export opportunities through globalization, which could help inequality. Now, okay, we skipped one there. So the main causes still undergoing much debate, but the literature suggests that financial evolution could be a significant factor. So my framework then focused on financial development, that is bank domestic credit to the private sector, influenced by the strength of the banking system and supervisory framework. But further research, as I alluded to, including globalization, defined as capital account openness and foreign direct investment, and liberalization, for example, pro-liberalization financial policy reforms, would be further steps in this direction. So looking at the Gini income index and trends for OECD countries, the source here being the World Bank, we do see some recent deterioration, as alluded to earlier, particularly in countries like the US, China, India, and the UK, which again begs the question of why this is happening and what are the underlying drivers, what potential policy reforms could be instituted to help reverse this trend. So looking at each of these then one at a time, I'll start with financial globalization. We've seen a big increase in financial globalization starting in the 1970s, improving integration among world economies, thereby arguably contributing to economic growth. which suggests, as manifested in the literature, benefits to low-income groups, providing new employment opportunities, for instance, export opportunities, particularly for emerging countries, as Kumar and Simran have indicated, looking at Asia specifically, where financial development, according to them, also plays a role. Or does this globalization promote more inward investment, leading to skill-biased employment? Maybe a phenomenon we're seeing around artificial intelligence today, where apparently people like Mark Zuckerberg are paying hundreds of millions to what he regards as talented professionals who have these skills, which could further increase that inequality. So that cuts both ways. If we look at globalization as it's occurred, you can see from the World Economy source here, a upward rise from the 70s, affecting all countries really, from high income to low income, with that positive momentum. Turning to the next prong, financial liberalization. Largely, this is seen as positive for income inequality, for income equality by many, Velichkova and others being just one example, where her team found a positive and statistically significant effect. The argument being that dismantling credit controls, thereby liberalizing the financial system, should ease access for low-income groups for financial services. But one needs to consider in this vein not just better access, but the efficient use of the borrowed funds. And many see, logically, I think, investment in human capital, that is education, as an efficient use. Murphy and Topel just being one example, observing that inequality arises when human capital investment does not keep pace with rising demand for skills. It's observed that countries providing free tertiary education tend to experience lower levels of inequality. And again, model nations like Finland, Norway, Denmark, Austria, and so on. However, I experienced this myself personally. The 2008 financial crisis was precipitated in part, I would argue, by excessive liberalization and lagging supervision in Western nations. Part of my career involved a stint at Lehman Brothers, who was the biggest casualty in terms of corporations of that crisis. So I still bear the scars of that experience. So we have to take this argument, I think, with some measure of caution. But we can see how financial liberalization has evolved, the trend being upwards again. And this chart, going back to 2010, and Abiad in his research, incorporates 7 dimensions of financial policy, such as credit, internal controls, entry barriers, state ownership, account restrictions, regulation and supervision of banks and securities markets. True for both, again, developing and developed nations. Now, this is another interesting phenomenon observed as well, studied by Lee and Lee. This chart shows educational attainment and income Gini coefficients across countries over this time period. And while the scatter plot is fairly broad, they fit a downward sloping line to that, indicating that the more schooling benefits the income Gini coefficient. We can look at a UK example. This is median annualized earnings among employees by age and qualification level. Actually, this applies to females, but you can see those who do well are those who have obtained a degree in terms of their career over their working lives and the compensation, whereas those who have not achieved an upper secondary qualification don't fare so well in terms of that income. And the same phenomenon is observed in a variety of different contexts. So let's turn to the third on which I focus, financial development, which is defined here as bank domestic credit to the private sector. And again, this has been used by many previous authors, including Clark, Ang, and others, and particularly focusing on India, I believe it was. And yeah, scholars have also tended to view this as facilitating economic growth in that it raises the scale and scope of business activities, with, however, still relatively unclear effects on income distribution. Some studies have observed that it initially mostly benefits higher income groups and over time spreads to lower income groups as well, such as Lee and Yu, who were, again, focusing on Asia. They also observed that use of credit controls, better supervision, and securities markets development tend to reduce income inequality. But the key here being equal access to credit, which ought to be aided by robust supervision of a strong banking system. Strong banking systems, sorry, let me go back to, and robust supervision of those systems are seen as contributing to facilitate more equal distribution of credit. Supervisors at the end of the day monitor bank performance in order to maintain high quality standards, which ought to result in consistent bank profitability, thereby contributing to higher capital and safety and expansion of the credit supply to higher risk segments. So as a result of this protective framework, this safety net, if you will, banks should feel more confident about lending to these higher risk segments, which generally are those in the lower income brackets. Let me get back to. So this shows the evolution of domestic credit to private sector by banks as a percentage of GDP. And this is on a global basis. So you can see there's been a strong upward trajectory there as well, with some slippages due to various factors, but generally an upward trend there. So on these factors, I based my empirical analysis, developing a basic, fairly simple financial development model, where I defined the Gini coefficient as a function of financial development, as defined by credit to the private sector as a percentage of GDP from WDI, using the income Gini coefficient obtained from the World Bank. BS represent the banking system Z scores from global economy. And again, this is a composite measure capturing components of the capital adequacy ratio, or CAR, of the Basel standard, incorporating also legal rights and credit information sharing prevailing in that jurisdiction, interest rates, development and policy as well, and components of liquidity and non-interest income in the banking system. So we have those two factors in the model, financial development and banking system. And I incorporated a third one, ultimately multiplying financial development times robust banking system. I used a multiplier ranging from 0 to 3 to denote the strength of the system and supervision to have it interact with financial development. Oh, you don't want to go there. So these are the regression results using the simple ordinary least squares, where the dependent variable is the Gini coefficient. So you can see, looking at the financial development, there is a negative correlation, which has been supported by past studies. In other words, the higher the degree of financial development, the lower the Gini coefficient, which is a good thing. However, when we incorporate banking system factors, we get a curiously positive, opposite correlation. In other words, the more robust the banking system really doesn't seem to benefit income equality. But when we factor in remove those with the weak banking systems, it turns to a positive correlation again. In other words, the combination, the interaction of financial development with strong banking systems reduces income inequality and the Gini coefficient at the end of the day. This study, based on the sample, yielded a relatively low R-squared, so it doesn't have much predictive ability, but I view it as kind of a starting point for further studies and sophistication around these factors, expanding the sample in terms of countries and time period and so on, and maybe using alternative banking system scores also, such as the rating agencies use, for which I used to work for, one, Standard & Poor's. So just to recap the results again, credit to the private sector appears negatively related to income inequality, suggesting that high income groups do not disproportionately benefit from the advantages of financial development, thus lowering income inequality. Banking supervision on its own, however, appears to be positively related to income inequality. However, when robust banking supervision is interacted with financial development, the relationship becomes negative, fitting with the view that banks would have higher ability and incentives to lend to all segments of society if robust supervision is in place for a strong banking system, resulting in wider credit distribution and more equal opportunities to generate wealth, thus leading to lower inequality. So the framework included the hypothesis that financial development lowers income inequality when it is accompanied by a robust banking system and supervision. Or to put it a different way, stricter banking supervision leads to improved bank performance manifested by a strong system, which should result in expansion of banking operations, which could encompass broader provision of credit to wider income segments in society. Therefore, increase of provision of credit, as defined by financial development, accompanied by broader credit distribution due to a robust banking supervision of a strong system, results in more equal opportunities to use the funds and generate wealth, resulting in reduced income inequality. And looking at those bank system scores, this has implications coming back to the Incasi focus, particularly for nations such as Argentina, Bolivia, Chile, Colombia, Ecuador, and Uruguay, which are seen to have relatively weak banking systems in the scheme of things. According to the Global Economy Z scores, they all rank below 10. The range goes from 0 to 52. Luxembourg is the highest observed at 52, which could suggest then some policy actions that governments and policymakers in those jurisdictions might possibly exercise. And then I end simply with a list of selected references, which I am happy to share. And that concludes my presentation. Thank you.
Okay.